I'm going to tell you something that was supposed to stay buried. Not metaphorically buried, actually buried, locked away in file cabinets that were later destroyed, in offices that no longer exist, by people who made sure their names disappeared from every document that mattered. This isn't folklore. This isn't campfire stories. This is about a recording I shouldn't have, about a project that officially never happened, and about the moment everything we thought we knew about Bigfoot stopped being a question of existence and became something far more disturbing. My name doesn't matter. Where I got this information, that matters even less now because most of the sources are dead, retired, or have made it very clear they want nothing to do with this story. What matters is what happened in the fall of 1978 in the Cascade Mountains, and what it means that I'm telling you about it now, in 2025, when something similar has started happening again. Every ghost story has that moment where the protagonist says they should have stopped, should have turned back, should have left well enough alone. This is that moment for me. I'm recording this, I'm releasing this, and I genuinely don't know if it's the right decision. But after what I heard 3 weeks ago in a recording from Olympic National Park, after the calls I received, after the warnings, I realized that silence might be more dangerous than speaking. So here it is. The truth about Bigfoot. Not whether he exists, that's almost irrelevant now. The truth about what happens when he decides to speak. And more importantly, what he's been trying to say. Let me start with the forest. It was late October, 1978, somewhere in the North Cascades. The exact location was redacted from every file I've seen, but based on triangulation from nearby ranger stations and old topographical references, I'd estimate it was within 15 miles of the Canadian border, in a valley so remote that even today there are no trails, no roads, nothing but old-growth forest and the kind of silence that makes you understand why people believed in monsters. There were 4 people there that night. Dr. Sarah Chen, a linguist from UC Berkeley who specialized in proto-languages and communication patterns in non-human primates. Marcus Webb, who the documents list as a consultant but who I later learned was former Army intelligence, specifically involved in signal interception during Vietnam. Robert Holloway, a field recordist who'd worked for the Smithsonian, and Jennifer Torres, a graduate student in anthropology who was there mostly to operate equipment and take notes. None of them were Bigfoot researchers. That's the first strange thing. None of them had ever investigated cryptids, never attended conferences, never wrote papers about Sasquatch. They were pulled together for something called the Cascade Linguistic Survey, which officially was studying bird calls and their relationship to indigenous territorial markers. But that was a cover story. A reasonably clever one, but still a cover. The real project had no name, or at least no name that survived in the documents. The people involved just called it the initiative. They'd been in those mountains for 6 weeks when it happened. 6 weeks of setting up directional microphones, 6 weeks of recording ambient sounds, 6 weeks of absolutely nothing interesting happening. The budget was running out. Chen was arguing with her department chair back at Berkeley. Webb had already said he was done after this trip. It was supposed to be the last night. The temperature dropped fast that evening. Torres's notes mention it repeatedly. By 9 p.m. it was 38 degrees, by 11 it was below freezing. They had a small camp, no fire, they'd been specifically instructed not to use fire, and they were running the recording equipment off battery generators that they'd hauled up there on mules. At 11:47 p.m., something screamed. Not howled, not roared, screamed. And I don't mean the way people usually describe Bigfoot vocalizations, that sort of extended howl or that wood-knocking sound. This was a scream that Torres later described as sounding like a man being burned alive, except it lasted for almost 40 seconds without stopping, without the voice breaking, just this sustained note of what she called pure conscious distress. They got it on tape. The original reel-to-reel survived, and I have a digitized copy. I've listened to it maybe 200 times. Every single time, my body has the same reaction, this full system adrenaline dump, this absolute certainty that I'm hearing something that wants me to know it's in pain. But here's what made it different. After that scream ended, there was silence for exactly 12 seconds. You can count it on the recording. Then there was a sound, and Chen was the first one to recognize what it was. It was the scream again, but played backwards. Not approximately backwards, not similar, exactly backwards. Every single frequency, every single overtone, in reverse order. Something in that forest had listened to its own scream and repeated it back to them in reverse. Webb wanted to pack up immediately. His exact words, according to Torres's notes, were, "That's a signal. That's active signal intelligence. We need to leave now." But Chen, and this is where everything went wrong, Chen said no. She said they'd just documented something unprecedented. She said whatever was out there was trying to communicate, was demonstrating both auditory memory and intentional manipulation of sound. She said they had to answer. So at 11:59 p.m., Sarah Chen, a linguist from Berkeley, did something that would destroy her career, end the project, and according to some accounts, eventually drive her to suicide. She walked to the edge of their camp, to where the microphones were set up, and she spoke into the forest. She said, "We hear you. Can you hear us?" Nothing happened for 3 minutes. They were long minutes. Torres's notes from this section are just the word "waiting" written over and over, increasingly shaky handwriting. Webb was physically packing equipment. Holloway was just sitting with his headphones on, staring into the dark. Then, at 12:02 a.m., something spoke back. "I need you to understand what I mean when I say, spoke." It wasn't language. It wasn't words. But it was structured sound with intentional gaps, with rhythm, with the kind of patterning that doesn't happen in nature. Chen described it later, in her only interview about the project before she disappeared, as proto-linguistic signaling with evidence of grammatical structure. What it sounded like, to everyone there, was someone trying very hard to shape their mouth around human speech and not quite succeeding. The recording lasts 41 seconds. I'm not going to describe every sound, but I'll tell you what Chen identified in her analysis. There were 3 distinct tonal groupings. There were repeated consonant-like sounds, specifically sounds similar to M, H, and W. And there was, and this is what made her cry when she first analyzed it, there was a questioning inflection at the end. It had answered her question with a question. Webb was done. He started disconnecting microphones. But Chen and Torres both wanted to continue. Holloway was the deciding vote, and what he said was, "I've been recording animal sounds for 20 years. That wasn't an animal sound. I need to know what it was." So they stayed. For the next 4 hours, they engaged in the strangest conversation in human history. Chen would speak simple phrases into the microphones. "We are here. We want to understand. Are you alone?" And each time, after a gap of anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, there would be a response. The responses got clearer. The phonemes got more precise. By 3 a.m., whatever was out there was producing recognizable vowel sounds. By 4 a.m., it was imitating the rhythm of Chen's sentences, even when it couldn't reproduce the actual words. By 5 a.m., right before dawn, it did something that made Chen collapse. She had said, very slowly, very clearly, "My name is Sarah." And after 2 minutes of silence, something in the darkness said, and I'm reading here directly from Torres's notes, something said, "SS Esquadera." It had tried to say her name. Torres wrote that Chen fell to her knees. She wrote that Webb was standing with a flare gun in his hand, not pointing it at anything, just holding it. She wrote that Holloway was laughing, not from humor but from something like shock. Then she wrote, and this is the last entry in her notebook from that night, she wrote, "It's coming closer. We can hear it moving. It wants to see us." The sun came up at 5:47 a.m. Whatever had been speaking to them through the night went silent at 5:42, right as the first light hit the treeline. They never saw it. They never even heard it leave. But in the morning, they found something. 70 feet from their camp, arranged in a careful line, were 17 river stones. Each one had been placed deliberately, each one was approximately the same size, and they formed a straight line pointing directly at the camp center. Chen believed it was a message. Webb believed it was a threat. Holloway didn't know what to believe. Torres just wanted to go home. They hiked out that afternoon. They brought all their equipment, all their tapes, all their notes. They reported to whoever was funding the initiative, which Torres never learned the name of, Webb refused to discuss, and Chen would only describe as a joint program without specifying which agencies were involved. And then, according to every record I can find, nothing happened. No report was published. No follow-up was conducted. The Cascade Linguistic Survey officially concluded with a paper about bird calls that Chen didn't write and never approved. Webb disappeared into whatever work former intelligence officers do. Holloway went back to the Smithsonian. Torres finished her degree and became a teacher in Portland. But Chen couldn't let it go. For the next 3 years, Sarah Chen tried to find out what had happened to the initiative. She filed Freedom of Information requests. She contacted everyone she could find who'd been even tangentially involved in any government cryptid research. She tracked down retired park rangers, old hunters, indigenous elders, anyone who might have information about similar encounters. What she found was a pattern. It wasn't common, and it was never official, but going back decades, there were reports. Not of Bigfoot sightings, not of footprints or tree breaks or howls in the night. Reports of interaction. Of exchange. Of something in the mountains trying to bridge the gap. A logger in 1953 who claimed something had imitated his whistling for over an hour, learning his entire repertoire of signals and then adding variations he'd never used. A geological survey team in 1967 who heard what they described as counting from outside their tent, the same rhythmic knocking that matched the number of people in the team. A group of hikers in 1972 who found stones arranged in shapes that corresponded to the constellation visible the night before. None of it was verified. All of it was dismissed. But Chen collected it all, cross-referenced it, looked for patterns in location and timing and behavior. What she developed was a theory that she never published but that I found in her personal notes, which her sister gave me after Chen died. The theory was this: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, isn't hiding from us because it's primitive. It's hiding from us because it's intelligent enough to choose isolation. It watches us. It learns from us. And occasionally, when the conditions are exactly right, when it encounters humans who approach without aggression, without weapons, without the intent to prove or capture or expose, it tries to make contact. Chen believed the initiative hadn't been the first attempt at communication. She believed it had been the first attempt that worked. And she believed something had gone horribly wrong after that night in the Cascades, something that had scared the program sponsors enough to bury everything. She spent 3 years trying to find out what. Then, in March of 1981, she disappeared. Not dramatically. Not mysteriously, at least not in the way you'd expect. She simply stopped teaching her classes at Berkeley, stopped answering her phone, stopped responding to mail. Her apartment was still full of her belongings. Her car was still in her parking spot. But Sarah Chen was gone. The official story, the one her family was given, was that she'd had a breakdown. Academic stress, they said. She'd checked herself into a private facility for psychiatric care, they said. She'd asked not to be contacted, they said. Her sister, Linda Chen, didn't believe it. Linda knew Sarah. She knew Sarah wouldn't just disappear. So Linda started her own investigation, which is how I eventually got access to all of this material. What Linda found was that Sarah had made one last trip to the Cascades in February 1981. She'd gone alone. She'd told no one where she was going or why. But Linda found receipts, gas station records, a notation in Sarah's calendar that just said, "Back to the source." Sarah had returned to the site of the initiative. And according to one unverified report that Linda managed to dig up, from a ranger who'd been doing a winter patrol in that area, someone matching Sarah's description had been seen near the Canadian border, had been seen setting up recording equipment, had been seen speaking into the forest like she was talking to someone. The ranger's report mentioned that he'd approached her, asked if she needed help, asked if she was aware how dangerous it was to be out there alone in February. Sarah had apparently told him she was fine, she knew what she was doing, and she'd be leaving by morning. The ranger left. When he came back through 3 days later to check on her, she was gone. The equipment was gone. There was no trace anyone had been there. Except for one thing. In the snow, arranged in a careful line just like those river stones from 1978, were 17 pine cones. Each one stood upright, perfectly balanced, pointing toward the sky. Sarah Chen was found 6 weeks later in a hospital in Vancouver. She had frostbite on both feet. She had lost 20 pounds. She had no memory of how she'd gotten to Canada or what had happened in those 6 weeks. And she never spoke another word for the rest of her life. Not metaphorically silent. Actually mute. Every neurological test came back normal. There was no physical damage to her vocal cords, no brain injury, nothing that would explain it. She simply stopped speaking. She lived in assisted care for 2 more years. Linda visited her regularly. She said Sarah would listen, would nod, would even smile sometimes. But she never wrote anything down, never tried to communicate what had happened. She died in 1983. The official cause was pneumonia. Linda believes she gave up. But before she died, Sarah did one thing. She gave Linda a box. Inside were all her notes from the initiative, all her research from the 3 years after, and a single cassette tape with no label. Linda gave me that box in 2024. She's in her 70s now. She said she'd held onto it for decades, never sure what to do with it, never sure if her sister would have wanted this story told. But then she saw something on the news. A hiker in Olympic National Park had recorded something strange. Something that sounded almost like language. Linda said, if it's happening again, people need to know what happened to Sarah. They need to know the risk. So I took the box. I digitized the tapes. I read every note. And I listened to that unlabeled cassette. I'm still not sure I should have. The unlabeled tape wasn't from the initiative. It was recorded later, in Sarah Chen's own voice, sometime between the night in the Cascades and her final trip. It's a monologue. She's clearly alone, clearly exhausted, and clearly afraid. I'm going to transcribe parts of it here. This is Sarah Chen speaking, probably in 1980, probably in her apartment at Berkeley, trying to explain something she doesn't fully understand. This is attempt number 4 at organizing my thoughts. I keep starting and then realizing I sound insane. Maybe I am insane. That would be simpler. But insanity doesn't usually come with evidence, and I have evidence. I have patterns. I have data that terrifies me. I've been analyzing the recordings from October 78 for 2 years now. Every single vocalization, every response pattern, every tonal shift. What I found isn't comforting. It's not even surprising anymore. It's just inevitable. The entity we communicated with that night wasn't trying to learn our language. It already knew it. Or at least, it knew the structure of it. What it was doing was testing us. Measuring our responses. Seeing how we'd react to graduated levels of contact. When I said, "We hear you," it didn't answer because it was surprised we could. It answered because that was the protocol. That was what it was waiting for. Someone to acknowledge it directly. Every response after that was calibrated. The first attempts at vocalization were deliberately primitive, deliberately rough. But if you analyze the audio, the frequency control is too precise. The phoneme selection is too accurate. It was mimicking what it thought we'd expect from a primitive creature trying to speak. By the end of that night, when it said my name, it wasn't struggling. It was performing struggle. There's a difference. I think, and God help me, this sounds paranoid, but I think it was evaluating whether we were ready. Whether humanity was ready. And I think our reaction, the fear, the confusion, the fact that Webb was standing there with a flare gun, I think that told it we weren't. The stones were a goodbye. Not a threat. A farewell arranged with care. I've found 17 other incidents in the historical record where 17 objects were left in a line. 17 seems to be significant. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. But it's consistent. Here's what terrifies me: all of those incidents happened before first contact. Before someone spoke directly to them. After that night in the Cascades, after I acknowledged it, after we had that exchange, those incidents stopped. Not just in Washington. Everywhere. I've tracked reports from Oregon, California, British Columbia, even Montana. Before October 1978, there's a steady pattern of these events. After October 1978, nothing. Complete silence. It's not that they disappeared. It's that they stopped trying. And I genuinely think, that it's my fault. I think we had a chance at something unprecedented, at actual communication with a non-human intelligence, and we failed. We responded with fear instead of curiosity. Webb drew a weapon. I broke down crying. We looked at a gift of stones and saw a threat. We told them, without meaning to, that we weren't ready. And now they're gone. Not extinct, I don't believe that. But withdrawn. Waiting. Maybe for another generation. Maybe forever. I'm going back. I have to go back. I have to find them again and try to explain. Try to show them that one person, at least one human being, understood what they were offering. I don't expect anyone to believe this. I don't expect anyone to understand. But if you're hearing this tape, if these notes end up meaning something someday, please understand, I didn't fail because I was crazy. I failed because I was too sane. I applied human fear to something that deserved human wonder. And I'm going to fix that. The tape ends there. That was Sarah Chen's last recorded statement before her final trip to the Cascades. Now, the official narrative would tell you that Chen went into those mountains alone, had some kind of psychotic break due to stress and obsession, wandered into Canada in a fugue state, and was found suffering from exposure and trauma-induced mutism. That's possible. It's even plausible. Obsession can destroy you. Isolation can break your mind. The cold mountains don't care about your theories. But Linda Chen gave me one more thing. Something Sarah had clutched in her hand when she was found in that Vancouver hospital. Something the medical staff had noted in their report but not thought important. It was a small carving, maybe 3 inches tall, made from a piece of cedar wood. It was crude but deliberate, shaped like a human figure with oversized hands raised in what could be interpreted as a gesture of greeting or farewell. The medical report noted it. The police noted it. But no one thought to ask where Sarah Chen, who'd been missing in the wilderness for 6 weeks in winter, who'd been found with frostbite and malnutrition, where she would have gotten a carved wooden figure. She couldn't have made it herself. She had no tools when she was found, no knife, nothing. Someone gave it to her. Someone wanted her to have something to hold on to. After reading Sarah Chen's notes and listening to her tape, I became obsessed with the number 17. Why 17 stones? Why 17 pine cones? Why did 17 objects appear in those historical incidents Chen had documented? I spent months going through archives, old newspapers, ranger reports, anything that mentioned unusual findings in forests across the Pacific Northwest. What I discovered was that 17 wasn't random. It was a signature. 1953, Olympic National Forest, 17 branches arranged in a circle. 1961, Crater Lake area, 17 smooth stones stacked in a cairn. 1969, Mount Hood Wilderness, 17 bird feathers tied together with plant fiber. 1974, Gifford Pinchot Forest, 17 marks carved into a single cedar tree. 1977, North Cascades, 17 bent saplings forming an archway. And then, after October 1978, after the initiative, nothing. No more 17. No more patterns. Just silence. But I found something else. Something Chen hadn't documented, maybe because she hadn't made the connection, or maybe because she had and it was too disturbing to write down. In indigenous traditions across this region, from the Salish to the Chinook to the Lummi, there are stories about the forest people, the wild men, the hairy ones. Different names, same entity. And in many of those traditions, there's a specific protocol for contact. If you want to show respect to the forest people, if you want to signal peaceful intent, you leave 17 offerings. 17 berries, 17 shells, 17 carved sticks. 17 is the number of acknowledgement. The number that says, I see you, I respect you, I mean no harm. The forest people were using our own cultural protocol. They were speaking to us in a language we'd forgotten we'd taught them. They'd been watching us for so long that they knew our traditions better than we did. Think about what that means. Think about the level of observation, of patience, of cultural retention that requires. These beings had maintained knowledge of indigenous practices for potentially centuries, waiting for humans who might remember, who might recognize the signal. Sarah Chen had been right. They weren't primitive. They weren't animals mimicking human behavior. They were participants in a cultural exchange so old that we'd lost our side of the conversation. And in 1978, when Chen spoke directly to them, when she broke the protocol of silent offering and demanded direct communication, she changed the rules of engagement. She forced a response they weren't ready to give. Or worse, she proved we weren't ready to receive it. I found one more thing in Chen's notes, tucked into the back of a journal from 1980. It was a photocopy of a page from an anthropological text about first contact between European explorers and isolated indigenous groups. Chen had highlighted one passage. The most dangerous moment in any first contact is when the more technologically advanced group realizes the other group is not primitive, but has simply chosen a different path. That realization forces a re-evaluation of superiority, of destiny, of the right to expansion. Many conquerors chose violence rather than face that re-evaluation. Next to it, in Chen's handwriting, what if we're not the advanced ones? Sarah Chen wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. I found 3 other people connected to the initiative who continued researching after the project ended. 2 are dead now. One agreed to speak with me, on condition of complete anonymity. I'll call him John. That's not his name, but it'll do. John was a data analyst. He wasn't in the forest that night in 1978, but he was part of the team that analyzed the recordings afterward. He was one of maybe 6 people who heard the full audio before it was classified and buried. We met in a diner in Tacoma. He's in his 70s now, walks with a cane, has the kind of face that's seen too much and stopped being surprised by anything. He brought a folder with him. Inside were printouts of sound wave analyses, spectrograms, data that meant nothing to me but apparently meant everything to him. Do you know what a spectrogram is? He asked me. I told him I had a basic understanding. Then you know it's a visual representation of sound. Frequency over time. Every sound has a signature. He pushed one of the printouts toward me. This is Sarah Chen saying, "My name is Sarah." It looked like what I'd expect. Bands of color, varying intensities, patterns that suggested speech. Now look at this. He pushed another printout toward me. This is the response. The thing in the forest trying to say her name. The patterns were similar. Not identical, the frequencies were different, lower register, but the rhythm was there, the cadence. Okay, I said. It was mimicking her. That's what we thought too. John pulled out a third printout. But then I did something no one else thought to do. I isolated just the attempt at the S sound. That initial consonant. And I ran it through a comparison algorithm against every animal vocalization in our database. And? No matches. Not approximate matches, no matches at all. The frequency control, the duration, the way the sound was shaped, it didn't correspond to any known animal's vocal capability. Not primates, not bears, not elk, nothing. So it's unknown, I said. That's the point, right? Unknown creature, unknown vocalization. You're not hearing me. John tapped the printout. I didn't say it didn't match known animals. I said it didn't match their vocal capabilities. The structure of the sound requires a vocal tract like ours. Flexible lips, precise tongue control, soft palate manipulation. This thing, whatever it is, has a human-like vocal system. I must have looked skeptical because he immediately pushed another printout at me. We did thermal imaging of the area where the sounds originated. Got 3 clear readings. Height approximately 8 feet. Bipedal stance. Heat signature consistent with a large mammal. But here's the strange part. He pointed at numbers on the readout. The heat concentration in the head and chest area was disproportionate. Higher than you'd expect from just a large body mass. Meaning? Meaning large brain, large lungs, both capable of supporting complex cognition and sustained vocalization. This wasn't a bear standing up. This wasn't a confused primate. This was something built for thinking and talking. I asked him why this analysis was never published, never shared, never used as evidence. John laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. You know why. Same reason the initiative was shut down. Same reason Chen was discredited. Same reason Webb disappeared. Someone very high up decided that confirming the existence of a human-level intelligence in the North American wilderness was not in the national interest. Why not? Think about it. John leaned back, stared at the ceiling of the diner. Public land rights. Indigenous territory claims. Environmental protection laws. If there's a sentient species living in those forests, species that was here first, species that arguably has more right to that land than we do, what happens to logging? To mining? To development? What happens to the entire legal framework of land ownership in this country? You're saying it was covered up for economic reasons. I'm saying it was covered up because the alternative was too complicated. Easier to dismiss a few recordings, discredit a few scientists, bury the data. Easier than facing the possibility that we've been sharing this continent with another intelligent species and we've been treating their home like it's ours to exploit. He gathered up his printouts, put them back in the folder. Sarah Chen understood that. She understood that proving they were real wasn't enough. She had to prove they were worth protecting. That's why she went back. She wanted more evidence, better evidence, evidence so clear it couldn't be buried. And instead she came back unable to speak. Or unwilling. John stood up, preparing to leave. Maybe what she learned out there was that some things aren't meant to be proven. Maybe they told her, or showed her, or made her understand that exposure would be extinction. That the only thing keeping them safe is our doubt. Do you believe that? I believe Sarah Chen was the smartest person I ever worked with. I believe she wouldn't have given up her voice without a damn good reason. And I believe something in those mountains is still there, still watching, still waiting for us to be better than we were in 1978. He left me with the folder. Told me I could keep it, that he was done being careful. He said, I'm 73 years old. Whatever they were afraid of happening, it can happen to me now. I don't care anymore. That was 4 months ago. I tried to contact him again 2 weeks ago, after the Olympic National Park recording surfaced. His phone was disconnected. I drove to the address I had for him. The house was empty, up for sale. Neighbors said he moved suddenly, didn't say where he was going. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's not. On November 3, 2024, a hiker named David Brennan was camping in Olympic National Park. He was on the Enchanted Valley Trail, about 9 miles from the trailhead, an area remote enough that he hadn't seen another person in 2 days. He was recording ambient sound for a podcast he was starting about wilderness therapy. Just nature sounds, bird calls, river noise, that kind of thing. His recorder was running all night while he slept in his tent. At 2:34 a.m., something triggered the sound-activated recording. Brennan didn't hear it at the time. He was asleep. He didn't discover it until 3 days later when he was reviewing his audio files. What he captured was 11 minutes of vocalization. Complex, structured, rhythmic vocalization. And underneath it, barely audible, what sounded like counting. He posted a short clip on Reddit. It went viral in the cryptozoology communities. Most people dismissed it as fake, or a hoax, or misidentified animal sounds. But some people who knew what to listen for, heard something else. They heard pattern. They heard 17 distinct vocalizations, each one lasting approximately the same length, each one separated by approximately the same interval. They heard the signature. Linda Chen saw the Reddit post. She contacted Brennan. She asked if she could hear the full recording. Brennan, to his credit, sent it to her without asking why. Linda listened to it and then she called me. "It's happening again," she said. "They're trying again." I listened to the recording myself. I'm not a linguist, I'm not an audio analyst, I'm just someone who's spent too much time in this rabbit hole. But even I could hear it. Whatever was making those sounds was trying to communicate. Not with David Brennan, he was asleep, couldn't hear it. It was trying to communicate with the recorder. With the microphone. With whatever might be listening later. It was leaving a message. I contacted John, or tried to. That's when I found out he'd disappeared. I reached out to the only other surviving member of the initiative analysis team I could find. She refused to speak to me, but she sent an email. One line. Tell them to stop leaving recorders. Tell them to stop listening. Please. I tried to contact David Brennan directly. He responded once, said he'd taken down the Reddit post, said he'd been getting strange phone calls, said he didn't want to talk about it anymore. I asked him if he'd gone back to the Enchanted Valley. He said no. He said he'd never go back to that part of the park. When I asked why, he sent one more message. Because 2 days after I posted that clip, I got an email from an address that doesn't exist anymore. No text, just an attached audio file. It was my own voice, taken from my podcast intro, saying, "Welcome back." But I never said those words in that order. Something edited me. Something spliced my own words to send me a message. Whatever is out there knows how to use our technology. And I don't want to know what else it knows. That was a month ago. I've tried to verify his story, tried to get access to that email, that audio file. But Brennan deleted everything, closed his accounts, stopped posting. He's gone dark. But I believe him. Because 3 weeks ago, I had my own experience. I live in Portland. Small apartment, nothing special, second floor of an older building. I work from home, mostly freelance research and writing. The kind of life where you can disappear into obsessive projects without anyone noticing. I'd been working on this story for 8 months. Compiling evidence, interviewing sources, listening to hours of audio. I had files spread across my apartment, printouts, notes, a whole wall covered in timeline correlations. I was careful. I didn't post anything online. I didn't discuss it with anyone except sources. I used a VPN for sensitive searches. I thought I was being smart. On December 2nd, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. I know the exact time because my phone was on my nightstand and I checked it immediately. Something had woken me. Not a sound, more like the absence of sound. That feeling when you know something's wrong but you don't know what. I got up, walked through my apartment. Everything was normal. Door locked, windows closed, nothing disturbed. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed my laptop on the kitchen table. It was open. I always close my laptop before bed. Always. The screen was on, showing a document I'd been working on. The file was my master timeline of Bigfoot communication attempts, everything from 1953 to the Olympic Park recording. But there was new text at the bottom. Text I hadn't written. It said, 17 attempts. All failed. Why do you persist? I'm not ashamed to say I panicked. I checked my door again, checked the windows, looked in closets, grabbed a knife from the kitchen. My apartment was empty. I was alone. But someone had been in my computer. Someone had accessed my files, read my research, and left a message. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I went through my security logs, my Wi-Fi history, everything. No unauthorized access. No signs of hacking. The file had been modified at 3:09 a.m., 8 minutes before I woke up, but there was no record of anyone typing, no keystroke logs, nothing. The next morning I told myself I'd done it myself. Sleepwalking, some kind of fugue state brought on by stress and obsession. I almost convinced myself. Then I checked my phone and found a voicemail from a number that showed up as unknown. It had been left at 3:15 a.m., 2 minutes before I woke up. I listened to it. I've listened to it 100 times since. I've had it analyzed by audio experts. They all say the same thing: it's authentic, unedited, and they have no explanation for it. The voicemail was 17 seconds long. It was the sound of breathing, heavy and deliberate, and then a single vocalization. Not words, but that same structured pattern from the Olympic recording. The same pattern from the initiative tapes. And then, at the very end, something that might have been my name. Or might have been an attempt at my name. I left my apartment that day. Stayed with a friend for a week. When I came back, there was nothing disturbed, nothing taken, but there was something left behind. On my kitchen table, arranged in a careful line, were 17 coffee beans. I don't drink coffee. I don't keep coffee beans in my apartment. They were a message. An acknowledgement. A response to my research, to my questions, to my persistence. They were telling me they'd been watching. They'd been reading what I wrote. They knew what I was trying to do. And they were asking me, the same way they'd asked Sarah Chen, the same way they'd asked through decades of subtle signals, are you ready? Is humanity ready? I'm still not sure how to answer. After what happened in my apartment, I knew I needed a different perspective. I'd been approaching this like a mystery to be solved, evidence to be compiled, a story to be told. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's why every attempt at contact had failed. I reached out to several indigenous groups in the Pacific Northwest, explaining that I was researching Sasquatch and trying to understand the cultural context. Most didn't respond. A few sent polite refusals. One person agreed to meet with me, on condition that I wouldn't use their name or specify their tribal affiliation. I'll call them Thomas. We met at a coffee shop in Seattle. Thomas was maybe 60, quiet, careful with his words. He asked me why I was really doing this research, what I hoped to accomplish. I told him everything. The initiative, Sarah Chen, the Olympic recording, what had happened in my apartment. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your problem is you're trying to prove something. They don't need proving. They're not interested in your evidence. They're interested in your respect. I respect them, I said. No, you're fascinated by them. That's different. Respect means accepting their choice to remain hidden. Respect means understanding that they don't owe you contact, don't owe you answers, don't owe you their existence. But they've been trying to communicate, I said. The patterns, the counting, the 17 objects. They're reaching out. They're responding, Thomas corrected. There's a difference. They respond when someone approaches them correctly, with humility, with offerings, with proper protocol. What they don't do is perform for cameras, prove themselves to skeptics, or validate your research. He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo. It was old, faded, showed a group of people in traditional dress standing in front of a forest. This was taken in 1923, he said. That's my great-grandfather, third from the left. He was what you might call a liaison. He knew the old ways of contact, the old protocols. He would go into the forest, leave offerings, speak the old words, and sometimes, he would receive a response. What kind of response? Nothing dramatic. A found object in a specific place. A pattern in the trees. Once, he told my grandfather, he heard singing that wasn't human but also wasn't animal. He said it was the sound of the forest acknowledging him. Did he ever see them? He said you don't see them unless they want to be seen. And they don't want to be seen by people who are looking. They only appear to people who are simply being present. There's a difference between hunting for something and being open to encountering it. Thomas put his phone away. The problem with your initiative, with all these attempts at scientific contact, is that you're approaching them like subjects to be studied. You're bringing equipment, recording devices, analysis frameworks. You're treating them like a research opportunity. How should we approach them? You shouldn't. Not as a we. Not as a group. Not as an expedition or a project. If contact happens, it happens between individuals who've earned it. Who've spent time in the forest not to find something, but to belong to something. Who understand that those mountains aren't human territory with unknown creatures in it. They're their territory that we're passing through. I asked him about the 17 objects, the pattern Sarah Chen had identified. Thomas nodded slowly. That's real. It's old. It goes back further than white contact, further than anyone remembers. 17 is a complete number. It represents a full cycle, a completed exchange. When you receive 17 objects, it means they've seen you, acknowledged you, and offered a connection. And what are you supposed to do when you receive it? You're supposed to leave 17 offerings in return. And then you're supposed to wait. Not with cameras, not with recording equipment. Just wait. Be present. Be respectful. And if they choose to reveal themselves further, they will. If they don't, you honor that choice. Sarah Chen went back, I said. She tried to complete the exchange. And she came back silent, Thomas said quietly. Maybe that's what they asked of her. Maybe that was the price of deeper contact. Your voice for theirs. Your words for their trust. The implication hung in the air between us. Sarah Chen hadn't lost her voice. She'd given it. Is that what they want? I asked. Silence? They want what all intelligent beings want. To be left in peace, to protect their young, to live according to their nature. They don't want to be proven. They don't want to be famous. They don't want to be captured, studied, turned into a spectacle. The moment you can prove they exist is the moment their peace ends. So all these attempts at contact, they're all failures because we're asking the wrong question. You're asking, are you real, when you should be asking, how can we coexist? You're asking, what are you, when you should be asking, what do you need from us? The answer, by the way, is nothing. They need nothing from us except distance and respect. Thomas stood up to leave. Before he went, he said one more thing. Your researcher, Chen, she understood this at the end. That's why she went back alone. That's why she went without equipment, without a plan to prove anything. She went to apologize. She went to show them that at least one human understood. And maybe they accepted that apology. Maybe they gave her something in return, some knowledge, some understanding that we don't have words for. And maybe the price of that knowledge was that she could never share it. Never speak it. Because speaking it would ruin it. He left me with that thought. I haven't spoken to him since, though I've tried to reach out. His number doesn't work anymore. The email he gave me bounces back. But I think about what he said every day. About respect versus fascination. About belonging versus studying. About the difference between proving something exists and accepting that it exists on its own terms. There's a strange thing that happens when you research Bigfoot. You start noticing things in the accepted, documented, uncontroversial historical record that suddenly seem significant. For example, in 1976, the Forest Service reported an unprecedented increase in non-standard tree formations in the Pacific Northwest. Trees bent in ways that don't occur naturally, branches woven together, saplings redirected in specific patterns. The official explanation was anomalous growth due to environmental factors. No one questioned it. In 1982, biologists studying black bear populations in the Cascades noted several instances of tool-use behavior that they couldn't explain. Bears using rocks to access food in ways that required multiple steps of planning. The findings were published in a minor journal and forgotten. In 1991, a comprehensive soil survey of remote forest areas found inexplicable disturbances consistent with large bipedal movement patterns. The survey noted it, documented it, and moved on. The evidence has always been there. We just keep explaining it away because accepting it would require us to change too much. I found a letter in Sarah Chen's files that she'd never sent, addressed to the head of the anthropology department at Berkeley. It was dated 1980, right before she disappeared. I think she wrote it but couldn't bring herself to submit it because she knew it would end her career. The letter said, "We've been so focused on finding evidence that would convince skeptics, we've ignored evidence that's already convinced the open-minded. Every indigenous culture in this region has stories about them. Every long-term forest worker has an unexplainable encounter. Every serious backpacker has a moment they can't rationalize. We have thousands of data points, but because they don't come from controlled studies, we dismiss them. We demand scientific proof while ignoring anthropological evidence. We want laboratory confirmation while dismissing cultural knowledge. And in doing so, we've missed the obvious: they're real, they're intelligent, and they don't want to be studied. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether we're capable of respecting existence that doesn't seek our validation. I think that letter is the key to understanding everything. The initiative failed not because contact was impossible, but because contact was attempted on our terms. Recording equipment, analysis protocols, scientific frameworks. We approached them the way colonizers approach indigenous peoples: document them, study them, catalog them, control the narrative. And just like indigenous peoples learned to withdraw from that kind of contact, so did they. There's a pattern in the historical record that took me months to recognize. Before 1850, before major European settlement of the Pacific Northwest, indigenous accounts of Sasquatch are common and unremarkable. They're just part of the world, other beings that inhabit the forest. Between 1850 and 1950, as white settlement expanded, the encounters become more dramatic. More aggressive. More territorial. The Sasquatch aren't just existing anymore, they're defending space. After 1950, as industrial logging and development accelerated, the encounters become more rare but more intentional. Less random sightings, more deliberate communication attempts. Like they're trying to reach past the exploitation to find someone who might listen. And after 1978, after the initiative, almost nothing. Just silence and occasional, very careful, very measured responses to individuals who approach correctly. It's not the pattern of a dumb animal. It's the pattern of a culture adapting to colonization. I've spent months analyzing the few recordings we have. The initiative tapes, the Olympic recording, a handful of other incidents that were documented before being dismissed. And with help from the linguistic analysis in Chen's notes, I think I've identified something. They're not trying to learn our language. They're trying to teach us to understand communication that isn't language. Every human tongue is built on the same principles: symbols representing meaning, grammar structuring relationship, vocabulary conveying concepts. But what if communication could work differently? What if meaning could be conveyed through pattern, through rhythm, through the spaces between sounds as much as the sounds themselves? The 17 patterns, the repeated vocalizations, the carefully arranged objects, they're all doing the same thing. They're showing us that communication doesn't require words. That intelligence doesn't require human-style language. That understanding can happen through attention, through presence, through recognition of pattern. When Sarah Chen said, "We hear you," and something responded, it wasn't answering her question. It was acknowledging her attention. When it tried to say her name, it wasn't mimicking human speech. It was demonstrating that it understood individual identity, personal recognition, the concept of names. When it left 17 stones, it wasn't leaving a calling card. It was completing a traditional exchange that we'd forgotten we'd started centuries ago. They've been communicating the whole time. We just keep expecting their communication to look like ours. I found one more thing in Chen's notes. A transcription of something from the initiative recordings that wasn't in any of the official reports. It's labeled, Anomalous Section, for 17 a.m., October 27, 1978. According to Chen's notes, this was recorded in the last hour before dawn, during a period when they thought the entity had withdrawn. The microphones were still running, but no one was actively monitoring. Chen only found this when she went back through the tapes weeks later. It's 17 seconds long. It's a vocalization that starts low and rises, then falls, then rises again. It sounds, Chen wrote, like a question, an answer, and a farewell all expressed in a single sound. She ran it through every analysis she could think of. And what she found was that the sound wave, when visualized, formed a pattern. The pattern was a topographical map. Or rather, it matched the shape of the valley they were camping in. The rises and falls in frequency corresponded to the rises and falls in elevation. They weren't just imitating sound. They were encoding location into sound. Chen wrote, "This suggests a form of communication where topography, geography, spatial relationship can all be expressed through vocalization. A complete alternative to language. Not primitive, not simple, just different. They can convey in 17 seconds of sound what would take us 17 minutes of description." And then she wrote, "If they can do this, what else can they convey that we're not equipped to understand? What have they been trying to tell us that we lack the framework to comprehend?" 3 days ago, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, no note, just a padded envelope with something inside. It was a small USB drive. On it was a single audio file, dated November 15, 2024, labeled Olympic Response. I don't know who sent it. I don't know how they got my address. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I've listened to it 7 times. Each time, I understand less and fear more. It's 41 minutes long. It's structured in sections, each one lasting approximately 2 minutes and 23 seconds. That's 17 sections. The first section is silence. Complete silence, not even ambient noise. The second section is forest sounds. Wind, birds, small animals moving through underbrush. The third section is human sounds. Distant voices, the echo of a chainsaw, an airplane overhead. The fourth section is a vocalization. Low, sustained, complex. The fifth section is the human sounds again, but distorted. Wrong somehow. The sixth section is more vocalization, but this time with rhythm, with pattern, with something that sounds intentional. And it continues like that, alternating and evolving, building to something. The final section, section 17, is the part one can't stop thinking about. It starts with what sounds like counting. Clear, deliberate, rhythmic. 1 through 17. Then there's a pause. Then the counting starts again, but backwards. 17 down to 1. Then there's another pause. And then there's a sound I can't describe. It's not animal, not human, not mechanical. It's as if something is speaking directly to the base of your brain, bypassing language, bypassing conscious interpretation. You don't hear it so much as feel it. And the feeling it conveys is urgency. Not danger, not threat. Urgency. Like someone trying to tell you something important, something critical, and knowing they're running out of time to make you understand. The audio file ends with 17 seconds of that indescribable sound, and then silence. I've had 3 audio experts analyze it. They all confirm it's not edited, not synthesized, not manipulated. It's a genuine recording of something producing those sounds. None of them can tell me what produced it. But I know. And if you've been listening to this story, you know too. Here's what I believe, after a year of research, after speaking to survivors of the initiative, after experiencing my own encounters, after sitting with indigenous knowledge and scientific analysis and personal terror. They're real. They've always been real. They're not animals, not primitive hominids, not cryptids waiting to be discovered. They're a parallel intelligence that chose, a long time ago, to remove themselves from human expansion. They're what we could have been if we'd chosen harmony over dominance, adaptation over exploitation, silence over constant noise. They've been watching us for centuries. Learning from us, trying to communicate with us, leaving messages in the only language they trust us to understand, pattern and symbol and careful, calculated gesture. The 17 objects, the structured vocalizations, the occasional interactions with individuals they deem worthy, it's all been an extended attempt at saying, we're here, we're aware, we see what you're doing, and we're asking you to stop. Not stop looking for them. Stop destroying what's left. Every tree cut from old-growth forest eliminates hiding places. Every trail blazed opens their territory to intrusion. Every development pushes them further into corners from which there's no retreat. They're not infinite. They're not unlimited. They're a finite population trying to survive in shrinking wilderness. And they're trying to tell us that time is running out. The urgency in that final recording, the countdown, the desperate attempt to convey meaning through pure sound, it's a warning. They're saying, this is your last chance to understand. After this, we either disappear entirely, or we have to reveal ourselves completely, and neither option is good. If they disappear, we lose something irreplaceable. Not just a species, but a form of intelligence we barely understand, a way of being in the world that could teach us how to coexist rather than dominate. If they reveal themselves, if they're forced to present proof of their existence to survive, then they become subjects of our attention. Scientists will want to study them. Governments will want to control them. Entrepreneurs will want to exploit them. The very act of proving they're real will destroy everything they've been protecting. Sarah Chen understood this. That's why she went back. That's why she gave up her voice. She was trying to say, I won't tell your secrets. I won't expose you. I'll carry the knowledge silently, and maybe that's enough. Maybe one human knowing and keeping that knowledge sacred is worth more than the whole world knowing and destroying what they find. You might be wondering why, if I believe all of this, I'm recording it. Why I'm violating the very silence I'm advocating for. Why I'm doing exactly what I'm saying shouldn't be done. 3 reasons. First, because something's changed. That Olympic recording, the audio file sent to my apartment, the reports I've been receiving from other researchers over the past month, they all suggest increased activity. More attempts at contact, more deliberate communication attempts, more willingness to take risks. They're not withdrawing anymore. They're escalating. And I think that means they've made a decision that silence isn't working. Second, because I'm not revealing location. I'm not providing evidence that skeptics could use. I'm not giving you tools to go find them. I'm giving you context to understand what you might encounter, and more importantly, how to respond if you do. Leave 17 offerings. Speak respectfully. Don't bring cameras. Don't try to prove anything. Just listen. Third, because I received one more message 2 days ago. I was working late, around midnight, when I heard something outside my window. Not alarming, just present. I looked out and saw nothing, but when I came back to my computer, there was a new text file on my desktop. It was titled, "Tell Them." Inside was one line, 17 years remain. I don't know what that means. 17 years until what? Until they're gone? Until something changes? Until a deadline we don't know we're facing? But I know it's significant. The number 17 has been their signature for decades. Now it's a countdown. So I'm telling you. I'm breaking the silence because maybe the silence is what they're asking me to break. Maybe they need someone to translate, to bridge the gap, to help humanity understand what we're about to lose. The truth about Bigfoot isn't that he exists. We're past that question. The truth is that he's been trying to communicate for longer than we've been willing to listen. The truth is that he's running out of time, and so are we. The truth is that there's a parallel intelligence sharing this continent with us, and we're on the verge of either connecting with it or losing it forever. The truth was supposed to die. It was supposed to stay buried with the initiative, silent with Sarah Chen, lost in the static of dismissed recordings and discredited researchers. But then he spoke. And then he spoke again. And now he's speaking louder, more clearly, more desperately than ever before. The question isn't whether you believe me. The question is, are you listening? Every forest you walk through, every mountain you climb, every moment of stillness in the wilderness, there's a chance you're being observed. A chance that something intelligent, something careful, something ancient is watching you and deciding whether you're someone who might understand. If that moment comes, if you find 17 objects in a line, if you hear sounds that seem too structured to be random, if you feel that overwhelming sense of being seen, remember, they're not asking you to prove they exist. They're asking if you can coexist. If you can respect. If you can listen without demanding answers. And maybe, if we're very lucky, if we're very careful, if we're finally ready to be something better than what we've been, maybe they'll speak again. Not to prove themselves. But to save themselves. And possibly, to save us too. 17 years. That's how long we have to figure out whether we're capable of sharing this world with an intelligence that doesn't look like us, doesn't think like us, doesn't communicate like us. 17 years to prove we've evolved beyond exploitation. 17 years to learn to listen. The countdown has started. The question is, what are we going to do with the time we have left? END. If you've encountered 17 objects, if you've heard the patterns, if you've felt their presence, you know this isn't fiction. You know this is the closest anyone has come to telling the truth. Don't go looking for them. But if they find you, remember, respect, not fascination. Silence, not exposure. Connection, not proof. We don't have much time left to get this right. 17 years. The truth was supposed to die. But truth, like life, finds a way to survive.